it's Shari here today, and I am going to be showing you how I made this fun magic iris card with the big ladybug in the middle of the magnifying glass. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp out my images. I'm using this very large leaf from the Hey Lady stamp set, and I'm going to color them with Copic markers. So I'm going to stamp in my jet black ink. You can see I already have a couple ladybugs colored there, and that was because I colored a whole bunch of them working on projects, and so I'm going to use those on the card as well. But I didn't have the little tiny ladybugs, so I'm just going to stamp one of those out to use as well on this project. So I'm going to color all these leaves exactly the same, so I'm just going to show myself coloring one of them, and I'm going to use a really pale green to start with and cover the whole leaf. Now this is kind of going to become the center part of the leaf. Then I'm going to go in with my middle color, and I'm just going to pull the color from the outside towards the end. Just kind of using a flicking motion. And of course, how much you put down depends on how dark you want your leaves. So now I'm going to use my darkest YG25 there, and I'm just going to kind of go around the edges. I'm not going to use a lot of this color. It's just sort of define the edge and those veins of the leaf. So then I'm going to go back with my middle green again and kind of pull that color in. And then I'm going to go all over with that lightest color and blend everything out. Now it will lighten stuff up a little bit. So I'm going to go back with that middle one again and sort of pull that color from the outside edge in until I get the look that I want. So for the ladybug, it's very small, so I'm just going to add just a little bit of red in only one color and then a neutral gray. So these are kind of almost too small to shade, so just one red will do it. Then I'm going to use my coordinating dies, and I'm going to cut out all these leaves and that one little ladybug. So this project is going to take 6 of those big leaves. And I'm going to cut all those out, and they're going to cover up the circle of the iris die. So that's kind of going to be our decoration on this particular project. Now I can work on assembling my iris, or at least cutting out the pieces of the iris. We're not going to quite assemble it yet till we color on the mechanism that goes in the middle, those petals that go in the middle, those sausage-shaped pieces. Now you need to cut 3 of those pieces, and I'm cutting them out of white because I'm going to color on them. You need to cut 3 of the circles, and you need to cut 3 of these connector pieces. So I'm just writing that on my die as a reminder, and then I don't have to think about it. I know I need to cut 3 to make my mechanism. So I'm just cutting these all out of the same white cardstock because in my case, on this particular design, they're all going to get covered up. Now out of one of the circles, you need to take this piece that I said looks like the flux capacitor from Back to the Future. And now I noticed that Kelly has called it that in her video as well. So take the flux capacitor, line it up with the middle of the circle, and then it will cut out these slots and these guides. And you only need to do that out of one piece. So now I'm going to take my 3 little petal sausage pieces here, and I'm going to kind of halfway assemble this. And this is so I can figure out where exactly I want to stamp my leaf. Now you could just stamp it on there if you want to, but I'm a little particular. I kind of want them all lined up in the middle. And I'll be honest, I didn't do as great a job on this one as I did on my original card that's like this, but it still works. It still looks pretty cool. So you want to slide them in the slots and then line them up with the edges of the circle. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull them to the inside of the slot. So just pull them to where their tabs are on the inside of the slot. Then I'm going to push them together. And this is what it's going to look like when it's closed, basically. And the reason I'm doing this, and you want to pull them all to the outside, because those little X's on there is where the glue dot's going to go that attaches to another ring. So obviously, those need to be lined up with the ring on the outside. So those need to be there so that they're going to get covered up by this. So you can see why I'm pushing them in the direction that I'm pushing them. So now that I've got them kind of where they're going to be when they are covered up and closed, I can figure out where I want to put this big leaf on that one petal piece. And all these are going to be stamped exactly the same. I'm going to show you how I did that. I put the negative piece where I cut out one of those into my MISTI, so I know exactly where my piece goes, and I can line up my leaf. And then I'll close the door of the MISTI and pick up that stamp. And then every one of these I stamp, I'm going to drop into that negative space on this piece of paper, and then that leaf will get stamped in the exact same spot on all three of those petal pieces. So I'm just going to put my magnet there to hold it in place. And I'm using the same jet black ink because I'm going to color these all over with Copics. But you can see how it is right against the edge. And I know from the way I placed them before that you're going to see most of that leaf when it's closed. Now I can take the other two and do the exact same thing, and that leaf is going to be in the exact same place on all three of them, and so it'll be nice and symmetrical when the magic iris is closed. Now to finish it off, I want to add a small leaf to each of these so that they're not just that one leaf, because when it starts to open, you're going to see that small leaf as well. So you're going to see a little more of this sausage petal piece, whatever you want to call it, a little more than what you see when it's closed as it moves. So I'm going to take the extra effort and I'm going to stamp this small leaf from a Bug Deal just kind of over to the side. You could completely cover these pieces with leaves if you wanted to, but you're not going to see the whole thing, especially the part with the little tab and the part where the X is. Those are going to be covered up all the time. So it's helpful to kind of make a practice one and see kind of what you're going to see. So now that all three of these are stamped the same way, I'm going to color my leaves the same way I colored my leaves before, in the same colors, so that everything looks like it matches. So the idea behind this was for it to look like a bunch of leaves that kind of opened and revealed the bug hiding in all the leaves. So that's where my idea came from. So once those leaves are colored, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a different shade of green and I am going to cover the rest of this piece with that green. So I think you could also do this and it would look really cool to maybe cut these out of a colored cardstock and then maybe color with colored pencils on top so that you already have your background color and then your leaves are on top of that. Now, as I said before, you're not going to see this part, but I don't know exactly what you're going to see and what you're not going to see, and so I don't want to run the chance of there being a tiny little white spot that I didn't color that you actually happen to see when the iris moves. So I'm just filling everything in all the way to the end. I am skipping the little tab piece at the end because I know for certain you're not going to see that, but I'm just going to cover the whole thing in the marker ink just so there's no chance of a little white speck popping through. If you spend all this time, you don't want one little white speck that'll stick out like a sore thumb. So now that they're all colored exactly the same, I'm just going to put the tab in the slots and I'm going to line it up with my circle. So you can see when you put the tab in the slot and you twist it, how the inside part of these shapes will line up with the inside part of the circle and the outside lines up with the outside. So now you're going to use the mini glue dots. So these are 3/16 size. You don't want anything much bigger than this, and you definitely want to use a glue dot. Liquid glue will not allow things to move like you need them to. So I'm just going to put a glue dot right on that little X that the die created on this petal. So you're just going to take 3 glue dots, one on each little petal, right on the X. So you can see they're right where they're at. So then you want to make sure that those are lined up with the circle. You could hold them in place with a little piece of tape if you're concerned about them moving, but if you line them up, you kind of just hold them there. You're going to take another ring that you cut before and lay it right on top, line it up, and it's going to stick to those 3 dots. So now I'm going to do these little connector pieces on the back. So those other little stitch lines are your guideline for where they go. You're going to line it up with the inside of the circle between those stitch lines. So you're just going to put your tape runner from the inside of the circle to the outside, right in that line where those stitching guides are, and put all 3 on there. All right, so this is also to help me remind me, the little tab I wrote on my die, to the right, which means it goes to the right of one of those connectors. So you want to put this on before you connect to the other circle. You want to put it to the right, you want to line it up with the corner, and then line up the inside with the circle. So it makes like a little V down there where that connector piece is between the connector and your tab. So now that that's in place, you're going to take the 3rd ring that we cut, you're going to lay that on top and line it up. And this is where we're going to fold over those connector strips. So you just want to put a little bit of adhesive on each one, and then you're going to gently fold it over and connect it to the top ring. You do not want these too tight, so very gentle, and it will not line up perfectly with the inside. You'll see the curve kind of matches, but it's not going to go all the way to the edge. So just be gentle with it, make sure it's a little bit loose, because if it's too tight, things won't move. So now is where you can kind of test it and make sure things move. So now to start decorating. So I cut the same ring out of a piece of green watercolor wishes paper. This is going to cover up my mechanism. Mostly it's going to get covered up by leaves, but again, I don't want any white possibly shining through, so I'm going to cut it out of green paper. And then I'm just going to lay my leaves around so that they're spaced right and they cover the whole ring. 6 is pretty good. You could have more if you wanted. So now that I've kind of figured out my spacing, I'm just going to use some liquid glue and adhere them all down. Now I am making sure that they don't cover up the inside too much, because you don't want to cover up your inside circle too much, because that's where you're going to see what's inside your iris. So they're going to overhang the inside just a little bit, but they're going to overhang the outside a little bit more. So they're going to be a little bigger than the ring normally is. So I put the top one and the bottom one so that I know that that's half of my circle, and then I'm going to fill in between those. And I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue so that I can kind of shift them around and get them positioned the way I want them. I kind of try to go from the stem at the edge and then the point of the leaf more centered, and that was sort of my positioning of these. And it covers up the ring pretty well. You can see a little bit on the inside, a little bit on the outside. So that is also why I cut it out of green paper. Now I'm going to make a backer for this. So this is a little bit different, and I'll tell you why I'm doing this. So this circle, which is the second largest circle, is slightly smaller. This is kind of going to be my back piece, where my bug is going to go. And then I'm also going to use the pink paper from Hello Sunshine with the little bees, the little tone-on-tone bees, as the background of my card. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out with the largest outside-in stitch rectangle, and I'm going to go ahead and adhere that down to a cream-colored card base here. All right, now that I have my background paper on, I'm going to start to assemble my iris a little bit more. I've taken the tabs that go in the slots and I've folded them in, because otherwise you will see them. And then I have put foam adhesive just on the little connector straps there. That is the only place that you want to put adhesive. Otherwise, the pieces will not move and it will not work. I'm using foam adhesive so that I have a little bit of space between my magic iris mechanism and my background, which is this circle piece that I cut earlier. And I'm using this instead of the drop-in piece just because I don't want that stitching detail. I want it to look like there's a big giant leaf behind these leaves. So now I can glue on the panel with all the leaves, and I've just laid my iris on my card because I know that I need the tab in the top right corner when it's in the closed position, and then this will allow me to line up the leaves that go on the front. So I'm lining it up to where the tab falls between two of those leaves, so sort of in the little valley that's made between the leaves, so that I'll be able to see the whole tab when it's closed. So now I can take the little decorative tab piece that has a stitching detail and I cut it out of sunflower cardstock, and I'm just going to glue that onto my pink tab. And that's why I cut the tab out of colored cardstock so you could see the arrow through it. Now if you didn't do that, you could always cut the arrow and drop it in that hole as well. I'm going to go ahead and put this whole piece onto my card base. So I've just added liquid glue to that piece of pattern paper that's on the back. Excuse my head. And I'm going to line it up to where the tab is in the top right corner and my die is, my magic iris is centered on my card. All right, now for the big bug. So I'm using the ladybug gift box add-on pieces. I'm just using the face and the antenna and that little piece that goes on top of the head. I don't need any of the other pieces. I'm going to go ahead and put the little headpiece on, and then I will put the little antenna on the back side. And don't worry, I'm going to fill in the face here in a little bit. You could also put a piece on the back for the face, but I just dropped pieces in. You'll see here in a minute. So he's going to fit, now he can only fit in a certain spot because there are 3 connectors in there that you can't go past. So he's got to fit in one of the corners. And then I'm going to trim off his corners so he fits a little better. So he has a way to slide between those connectors. So this is me just figuring out how much to cut off. So I cut off some, it needed to be a little bit more cut off. Just the corners. And you're not going to see this part, it's hidden by the leaves. So now I've got some glue on him and I'm going to just slide him in there. He's going between those connector pieces. You don't want to slide him down there too much because you want to see him, but just know that there are some pieces once this magic iris is constructed that get in the way of you sliding things behind them. All right, so I took a piece of scrap cardstock and I cut out the face again so that I could use the eyes and the mouth. So I've just popped those out and I'm just going to put them back in the voids with a little liquid glue. Like I said, you could also put a piece of black cardstock behind it. Now, since I don't have any spots because I'm not using the leaves of this die, I just use a black pen to add my own spots to his head and a pink colored pencil to add some rosy cheeks. Now here's the fun part of the giant magnifying glass. I had the idea to use the stitched balloon frame for the magnifying glass. And then I'm using the ice cream U-screen dies that have the little popsicle sticks for the handle. So that one cuts 2, and I'm actually going to use 2 just to make it a little more sturdy. But I've cut that out of paper bag cardstock, and then for the balloon or the frame of my magnifying glass, I'm actually going to use this light gray that is part of the shimmer neutral pack. So you can see I've cut that balloon out of that shimmery gray, and I'm just going to put a little bit of glue at the top of this popsicle stick and I'm going to attach the balloon to the stick. That little bottom part of the balloon is perfect to make this a magnifying glass. And then I'm going to take the other piece that I cut and I'm just going to layer it on the back just so the handle is a little more sturdy, because on this card it's just going to be hanging out there because everything's popped up. That handle has nothing to glue down to, so just so it doesn't get bumped and bent. So now I can put my magnifying glass right down onto my leaves. So I don't need any glue on the handle because, like I said, that's just going to hang out there and it's not touching anything. All right, now for the sentiment, I'm using a bug deal, and I'm using, this is a really bug deal, happy birthday, because there's a giant bug inside, so it is a really bug deal. But I've cut the sentiment banner, just a part of it, because it's going to hang off the card, out of Guava Cardstock. I'm stamping my sentiment in some clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to add some white embossing powder to it. And then I'm just going to heat that up with my heat gun till it's all melted. So I just trimmed off a little bit more just so that was centered a little bit better. And then I'm just going to adhere this down to the bottom right corner. And I'm going to line up that right side with the pattern paper. Now to finish it off, we got a couple more details. We need the little bugs. So these bugs are little because they're not in the magnifying glass. So I just kind of sprinkled them around. They're kind of crawling around on the outside of the glass. I like that this one's sort of on the front of the magnifying glass. And then when the iris opens, it magnifies and there's a big bug staring back at you. And it was really Jen's idea for this big bug in the middle, so I give her credit for that. So this was kind of a joint effort. So thanks, Jen, for that great idea. So here is another look at that card. And here's some shots of it in action. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.